So let me just welcome people for joining Caribbean Labor Solidarity on this Sunday Zoom meeting, February, yet again. Today, our program is dealing with the environment, climate justice, and the right to protest. I think, you know, our human rights in the UK certainly is under some serious pressure at the moment. I remember when they first thought about banning drums at meetings and so on, it seemed like a direct attack upon Africans. You know, we walk with drums and we make too much noise. We can protest, but don't make noise. Pretty much in what they're trying to do with the environmental activists. You can protest once you don't stop the traffic or, you know, disturb anybody or upset anyone. You know, what kind of protest is that? We see as well with the unions in the way in which they're protesting, the anti-strike legislation, which this conservative government is trying to introduce. And, you know, we think it's just ridiculous, and workers are rightly up in arms in every section of the society. Some of you may know that we had big demonstrations in London just on this last week. Some 500,000 people were out in the streets, including CLS with our banners. You will see the pictures at some point. So we joined with those protests to lodge our feelings really about, you know, how to think about the way in which they're trying to treat workers in the UK. We note that it's not only in the UK that workers are protesting. In France, over 1 million people were in the streets protesting about pensions. And other European capitals as well. I think even America, there's been protests. So workers are protesting and we support that. And so we will be out. What's happening? I've gone off the screen. My screen has changed. Is there anything I should do about that, Steve? Okay, it's back. My screen is back. Okay, I just got worried for a moment as to what was happening there. No, okay. As I said, you know, it's protests that are happening, and we support those activities wherever we can. But today we've got speakers. We've got 3 speakers mainly. I will ask Nick to speak first. She's been campaigning against the way in which the big oil is operating in the UK, and I think some of the protests you've done is at the Barclays Bank and other places. But I leave you to say some more about that and inform us about what you're doing. So without much ado, can I introduce Nick Harries to please take the floor?
Thank you, Luke, for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me to come and speak to you again about protest, and on this particular occasion, about climate justice and the right to protest. When I was first thinking about how to present this to you, I looked for a good definition of climate justice. And I found this quote from the Mary Robinson Foundation for Climate Justice, a really useful summary. Climate justice links human rights and development to achieve a human-centered approach, safeguarding the rights of the most vulnerable people, and sharing the burdens and benefits of climate change and its impacts equitably and fairly. Climate justice is informed by science, responds to science, and acknowledges the need for equitable stewardship of the world's resources. I'd like to think this concept was at the forefront of the world's leaders' minds when they attended COP27 in Egypt at the end of last year. And there were some positives for climate justice, with the rich nations finally agreeing to some financial responsibility for the climate costs to more vulnerable countries. The commitment was an historic step, although follow through is still needed to actually create a functional loss and damage fund. So in theory, steps have been taken to acknowledge the need for financial support for those poorer countries that have not actually been the major consumers of fossil fuels, but have suffered the ravages of climate change brought about by the devastating impact of CO2 emissions over the past 150 plus years. Global Justice Now argues that one key element in the reparative process would be to tax corporations significantly more and to use at least some of the funds to provide increased financial transfers to the global south. We're not seeing signs of such steps being taken in the UK, are we? Over and over again, we read more stories of those in power being backed by big oil, profit being the main motivator, and loopholes abound for oil companies to avoid paying windfall taxes by purportedly investing into green energy schemes. Who is going to make the polluters pay? Across the world, various court cases have been brought to try to bring the polluters to account with varying degrees of success. And there is a momentum towards more such legal actions against a number of big name companies in the fossil fuel industry. Just this week, next to an article declaring Shell had made an obscene profit of $40 billion in the last year, was one outlining the action taken by 14,000 people from 2 Nigerian communities who are suing Shell for damages for devastating pollution of their water sources and destruction of their way of life. And just 2 days ahead of Shell's profit announcement, 4 Greenpeace international activists boarded the White Marlin vessel in the Atlantic Ocean just north of the Canary Islands. The vessel was on its way to the Penguins field northeast of the Shetland Isles in the North Sea. This peaceful protest aims to highlight the worldwide climate devastation caused by Shell and the wider fossil fuel industry, who haven't paid a penny towards the loss and damage they've caused. The Guardian newspaper published an article on the 4th of January this year suggesting that 2023 will be a watershed year for climate litigation. It details a lawsuit brought by children and young people against the state of Montana in the US for failing to protect their constitutional rights, including the right to a healthy and clean environment, by supporting an energy system driven by fossil fuels. And this action's been given permission to go to trial in June. There are a number of other such legal actions pending against governments in Canada, Mexico, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, as well as actions brought against various member states in the European Court of Human Rights. These lawsuits are gathering momentum, but it's absolutely clear we cannot just sit back and wait for governments to do the right thing, particularly not our own. With an election looming in less than 18 months, politicians are far more interested in saving their seats than saving the planet for their children and grandchildren. I, for one, am fed up with signing petitions, emailing MPs, even though my MP is one of the best, Caroline Lucas, which is why I joined Extinction Rebellion at the beginning of 2020. When we have the Secretary General of the UN telling the world at COP27 that we are on a highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator, and that investing in new fossil fuels is moral and economic madness, we cannot just sit back and wait for our government to take action when we see them clearly getting ready to grant new licenses for new oil and gas fields in the North Sea, a new coal mine in Cumbria. The list goes on. To quote Antonio Guterres yet again, climate activists are sometimes depicted as dangerous radicals, but the true dangerous radicals are the countries that are increasing production of fossil fuels. But where to now with the right to protest? There's an article today in The Observer entitled "Protest at Your Peril." And I thought about just tearing this talk up and inviting you all to read it. But in the true words of Magnus Magnusson, having started, I will finish. So just to tell you that in the first week of January of this year, the NGO Human Rights Watch published its 2023 global report. And in the section on the UK, it raised grave concerns over UK laws, either proposed or already in force, such as the Public Order Bill, which would restrict the right to protest and increase penalties, the Elections Act requiring voter identification, the law limiting people's rights to judicially review social security and immigration decisions, and the Nationality and Borders Act, which criminalises asylum seekers taking irregular routes, increasing powers to strip people of citizenship, and allows offshore processing of asylum claims. Human Rights Watch considers the UK to be on track to join the category of human rights abusers. But instead of the government rowing backwards, they've merely piled on the pressure in the last few weeks by seeking to further increase police powers under the new Public Order Bill and by introducing anti-strike legislation. I see these latter two closely interconnected. People only take to the streets to protest or withdraw their labour and take all the personal consequences of loss of pay as a matter of last resort, when there is no alternative. I spoke to you all about 12 months ago about the government's attempts to crack down on protests through the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill, which became an Act of Parliament in May last year. Priti Patel was disappointed not to achieve all that she set out in that act, as the House of Lords rejected her last-minute attempts to strengthen police powers. However, she went straight ahead and filed a new public order bill, which started its progress through Parliament last summer and is now once again in the House of Lords. The areas of most concern in that draft bill are these serious disruption prevention orders, which are also known as protest banning orders. And this disproportionate measure can be issued to any person who's attended 2 or more protests in 5 years, whether or not they've committed an offence, and sets a range of conditions, requirements, and prohibitions on what they can and can't do. Secondly, there would be new protest-related stop and search powers, which expands both suspicion-less and suspicion-based stop and search powers, which are disproportionately used against communities of colour, and allows police to stop and search people and their vehicles and confiscate items they believe might be used to commit a protest-related offence, such as glue, bike locks, or placards. And thirdly, locking on offences. From the suffragettes to the anti-war campaigners to environmental activists, locking on is a vital protest tactic that has been used throughout history. Defined broadly in the bill, these offences will criminalise the act of essentially attaching yourself to another person or an object or to anything else. And this could mean anything from gluing yourself to the street to linking arms. Just 2 weeks before the report stage of this bill, the government introduced yet more amendments, this time trying to define serious disruption in relation to specified new offences, to limit the defence of reasonable excuse, and to create new triggers for the police to impose conditions on protest. Together, these constitute a drastic further expansion of police powers, allowing the police to intervene in and impose conditions on protests that have a more than minimal rather than serious impact. And far from clarifying matters, these amendments exacerbate legal uncertainty and threaten to further restrict the right to protest. The addition of these controversial amendments at such a late stage in the passage of the bill raises further concerns as to whether they can be properly scrutinised. The House of Lords inflicted some defeat on the government last week on the 30th of January, and the next session in front of the House of Lords is tomorrow. One of the most vocal opponents to this bill is Lord Paddock, who was himself a Deputy Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police and who clearly feels very strongly that it is wrong to criminalise protest in this way. It remains to be seen what further draconian laws will reach the statute book this year, but given the government's majority, it's quite likely that most of them will become law. So what impact will these further restrictions have? Stephen Reicher, Professor of Psychology at St Andrews, was writing recently and said, history shows that attempts to suppress dissent through indiscriminate repression have precisely the opposite effect. Such an approach generally recruits more dissenters and radicalises their actions. It creates rather than preempts chaos. And he quotes from a book, America on Fire, a searing account of relations between Black people and police in the US during the late 1960s and early 1970s, where the author, Elizabeth Hinton, refers to the cycle. Protests against racial equality were treated as a law and order problem to be met by an increasingly heavy policing and legislative response. This in turn compounded the original sense of injustice and provoked more protest, and so demonstrations became confrontations, and confrontations became armed conflicts. Once you make protests more conflictual, many people, especially families, disabled people, older people, members of vulnerable groups, will be deterred from joining in. And so gradually participation will be reduced to those who are comfortable with the fight. Not only is this at odds with the democratic and human rights imperative to make protest a safe space in which all sections of community feel able to participate, it also constitutes another path to make conflict more likely. The principles and values of Extinction Rebellion are clearly grounded on a foundation of non-violence, but direct action, even non-violent, can lead to arrest, and an increasing number of climate activists are appearing before the Crown Courts to answer charges that have been brought against them for following their conscience to sound the alarm. And due to some recent changes in the law, judges can now literally shut down any mention of the climate crisis or of the activities of the target of the protest. This is where a quick glance back into history can be useful. In 1670, 2 Quakers were charged with preaching to an unlawful assembly in the City of London. The jury rejected the trial judge's direction to convict. And then, although the jury was sequestered for 3 days without meat, drink, fire, and tobacco, or so much as a chamber pot, if desired, they refused to change their mind. And when each of the jurors was fined something like a full year's wages, several of them refused to pay. And when, as a result, they were committed to prison, they managed to obtain a court order for their release. And there's a commemorative plaque to them in the Old Bailey, which records that they established the rights of juries to give their verdict according to their convictions. Protesters who take action in accordance with their conscience do so in the knowledge that they may risk losing their liberty. As this government introduces more and more legislation that criminalises their attempts to effect urgent change in the mindsets of industry and institutions, ordinary people can stand up in support of these brave activists and give their verdict according to their convictions, as the Quakers did in 1670. So if you are called upon to sit on a jury, do not be cowed by the man, it's usually a man, in the wig sitting on the dais. Be true to your own conscience and send a powerful message to the judiciary and to this government that you will not be complicit in a system that criminalises protest. You may have read in the media on the 1st of January that Extinction Rebellion has a New Year's resolution. We said, we quit. The press jumped onto this as evidence that Extinction Rebellion were closing up and ceasing their protest activities. In fact, just last Monday, on the 30th of January, Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil, Netpol, and 21 other movements met under the banner Unite for Justice outside the Royal Courts of Justice to highlight the failure of the justice system to protect the rights of people and planet. The action honoured earth and human rights defenders around the world, many of whom have paid a disproportionate price, from incarceration to death, for taking protest action. It also spotlighted legal cases fighting corporation, government, and the law itself. The message Extinction Rebellion are trying to get out is that actions that disrupt the general public will not be our primary focus. Our aim is to mobilise people from all different movements and perspectives who share the common aim of saving this planet and all life forms by creating a universally acceptable standard of living for everyone and to demand climate justice. So here is a metaphorical call to arms. How wonderful it would be if 100,000 people descended onto Parliament Square on Friday, the 21st of April, to give a very clear message to this government that this form of democracy is not working. We have to end the fossil fuel era. To do this, we must ensure our future democracy is citizen-led, to create a society which is fair and which includes reparation. Please join us if you can. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for that, Nick. As you spoke, I was beginning to get worried at the beginning, you know, the amount of draconian measures being put in place. But it's good that you end on a high with, you know, at least letting us know that there's resistance and how resistance can happen. Which brings me on to the next speaker. But before I do, I should say that people, please save your questions. The 3 speakers will go, and then we will have a chance to have a discussion, and you can put your questions to the speakers. So without much ado, let me introduce Alfie Beswick, who is a campaigner for Just Stop Oil. He spoke briefly at our meeting, at the last meeting. I was really appalled to hear that he actually had to spend some time as a result of his activism. And as a result, I came up with a trophy. You know, they're trying to denigrate you, but when I see you, Alfie, you've got your trophy, a champion fighting
Thank
climate
you.
change. So,
It's all worth it for the trophy. Forget about the planet.
Yeah,
That's
but let me finish by saying that, you know, we would like to do more than just offering you a trophy. We would also, a CLS, like to make a donation to, you know, your fighting fund or whatever it is. We can make a small donation towards that. So that is something that will come. And as I'm talking about money, it reminds me that it's February, the second month in the year. This is the time we try to remind our members to renew their membership. And I did it last night. And thanks very much to Denat Kwabina and Steve for setting up the PayPal account, which makes it so easy. I couldn't believe how easy it was to just click a few buttons and pay my subscription for the year. So I want to encourage you, if you haven't joined CLS, to join. Encourage your friends to join. We're not a funded organization. The activities and the things that we can do depends on donations and depends on membership. Membership is also important for us because, you know, when we take activities and do actions, it really, people will have more regard and respect for you, as it were, depending on your membership. If it's just me and Steve going and protest, they'll just tell us to go away. But when they know we've got you behind us, you know, they will have to listen to us. And one of the actions we just took was, you know, some of you might have heard about the church CAV making a saying that they will pay reparations to the tune of 100 million. My good economic friend did a calculation, you know, and he reckoned it's way too little, but we won't frighten them with the sum that we'd be demanding now. But we did write to the office to say we needed to have a discussion. We need to have a meeting with them. You know, pretty much is the last donation we heard about in Grenada. You know, people decide how much, where it goes, how it goes, and the rest of it. And, you know, that is not acceptable to us. We need a say in how any reparations money will be spent, and we need to be at the table discussing it with them. So this is one of the reasons we wrote to the Archbishop. We had a response, and it's been passed on to, you know, the office concerned, as it were, and we're waiting to hear from them. We will be keeping you informed in, you know, how developments are going. But we think certainly a discussion needs to happen, unless it feels like a bit of charity. No, it's about reparations. The wrong has been done and we want to be compensated. It's not the only thing. We're calling for an apology, as some people are doing already. Okay, I just said a little bit there about Alfie. So please join CLS, make your donations, visit the website. This was very easy. I actually just Googled Caribbean Labor Solidarity. The information came up. There's a place to pay, and in 2 minutes, I'd made my, I fixed my membership. So please join us with that. Okay, Alfie, can I introduce you now to take the floor?
Thank you so much, Luke, for having me on, and your kind words and support. So yeah, as Luke kind of mentioned, I was one of these people who was subject to the new draconian laws in November, which basically ended up with me spending 28 days in prison for actions that I took with Just Stop Oil. So I'll get onto that in a minute, but firstly, I'll just start from my own sort of personal journey, which was, so I started with me working for a homelessness charity, and I was there for a few years, this big homelessness charity in the UK, and I kind of felt like I wasn't really able to impact change as I'd have hoped, like a lot of people in this sector feel, I think. And then these sort of feelings coincided with the release of the IPCC report, the latest one in April, which Nick may have mentioned. Just to pick out a few things from this IPCC report, which really just like brought my attention to the climate crisis in a more serious way. One of the main things that really stood out for me was that by 2030, according to the IPCC report, they estimate that there'll be approximately 750 million climate refugees. So I think the figure at the moment of the number of refugees globally is around 30 million. So if you just imagine that in 7 years' time, the figure is going to balloon to 750 million. And it's a number that's just almost incomprehensible. So right now, what we're seeing in East Africa, where they've just had year on year of terrible droughts, obviously Pakistan, with over 30 million people being displaced, and India, the heat waves in India last summer. There's just countless examples now. It's you don't have to dig deep to see the impacts that just evidence of the climate crisis being here right now. I think New Zealand is a very recent example with the floods that are going on there. So this is obviously shocking, but I think people are still kind of desensitized to it. And these figures like 750 million, just, it doesn't sort of, people just, you know, they sort of shrug their shoulders at this point because it's just getting so bad. It's almost not worth thinking about. The other thing that really, I suppose, made it real for me was this idea of not just the climate breakdown, but societal breakdown, which I think particularly in countries north of the equator that aren't in such climate danger zones, if you like, societal breakdown will probably precede climate breakdown. And that's because you know, food supply chains are going to be so badly disrupted. The UK imports over 40% of their food. So one example of societal collapse in this way was Hurricane Katrina, where because there was no food supply in New Orleans, police even started to join in with looting. We know the police in America are terrible, so it's not set to suggest that the situation as it is now is you know, okay, but police were joining in with the looters. And I think it kind of exemplifies this idea that we're only 3 missed meals away from society breaking down, which is quite terrifying when you think about it. And I think when you saw what happened in the COVID-19 pandemic, with people being scared of running out of toilet roll in the UK, you know, supermarkets were complete chaos. And if you just imagine what that's going to be like if the thing in short supply is food. So Nick already touched on Shell's profits and this continuation of capitalist realism and the messaging that's being put out by the government that, you know, we'll need oil for years, we'll need it for decades. This is just shows a complete cognitive dissonance, if you like, because it's just completely ignoring the science. It's like we have to continue with oil because our economy operates on oil, irrespective of losing everything. And I mean everything. So that's kind of what pushed me to getting involved in Just Stop Oil. And Just Stop Oil started out at the beginning of last year, and their demand is that the government issues no new fossil fuel licenses. So that's not to say they want to cut off oil now. They just want no more oil exploration and new licenses. And they want a just transition for workers in the fossil fuel industry. So in April, they went and disrupted the oil depots themselves, around 600 people. But this got very little press because these depots are out of town, and obviously these oil companies don't really want them to get a lot of coverage. But I heard about it and wanted to get involved, and I was first arrested taking this direct action, which I was really sold on, and I was just part of a group of people that blocked a petrol station. It was like the largest in the UK, I think, and disrupted it. And then I was helping with the mobilization throughout last year. And in October, we had a campaign because the media, there was a lack of media attention, as I've said, in the April campaign, April actions. So the plan moved to these roadblocks, which are very kind of disruptive of the public, unfortunately. But they gain a lot of media publicity, and it was in the news every single day. People knew about it. There were all these videos which you might have seen of people being dragged out the road, and it kind of creates this polarizing effect. And obviously, enormous amount of hate. Just Stop Oil was incredibly unpopular, but that was always that was to be predicted, and it didn't change the plan, if you like. But unfortunately, that didn't quite work. The plan was to get so many people being arrested at the same time that the government just wouldn't have anything what to do, and it would just kind of snowball. Didn't quite work. So I think I was kind of already on this path, and it was probably inevitable that I ended up doing some time at Her Majesty's pleasure. But I then was part of the 60 people, I think it was, who climbed onto the gantries and over the M25, which shut down the motorway. Again, a very divisive action. And if you ask me now, I'm still not sure. It's a far from ideal situation. But again, massive media publicity, getting the message out there, disrupting the public, yes, but I think the right-wing media love to kind of bring out these stories on who missed certain appointments, who missed work, and this kind of thing. And one person missed their father's funeral, I believe. That was the main thing that they went with. And that was 4 days of the M25 being largely completely at a standstill. And all the attacks about, stopping special important services, I just find quite, it doesn't quite work for me, given there's queues of ambulances outside the NHS, outside hospitals, with people dying in ambulances, having been in there for 48 hours at times. And, it's just symptomatic of the current government's terrible policies and cuts to public services. So I was remanded in prison for 28 days, and it was obviously scary. I didn't know how it was going to be. But actually what I found was that people in prison were actually as a whole very supportive, and they seemed to understand the climate crisis and the threat that it posed a lot more than most of the people in charge of this country. And one thing that it also kind of reaffirmed to me was the interconnectedness of all of the issues that have arisen from this current system. Because the amount of people that were in prison on remand, when they really pose very little danger to the public, and this kind of backwards draconian justice system was, I mean, eye-opening to me. I didn't really. I think prison is something which is not really thought about by most people. But I'll never forget my first cellmate, who was he was homeless on the outside, and he was released after about a week of me being there. And then a few weeks later, I saw him again in the yard, and I went up, started speaking to him. I was like, "What happened?" And I never forget what he said, because he said that when he was released from prison, he was back on the street. He didn't want to go back to committing crime, and but he had addiction problems from being on the street. And he said that, "I just wanted somewhere to be for Christmas. So I skipped my probation appointment so I could come back to prison. So I'd have a roof over my head and food in my belly." And that was just the most heartbreaking thing to me, and kind of just highlighted the interconnectedness of all of these things that we're fighting for. So I'll never forget that. But after I was released from prison, I've been given a suspended sentence now, so I can't really get involved in the same way. And I think, as Nick touched on, these new laws now mean that you could be arrested just about doing anything. The police now have a discretion to decide what is, I think I'm right in saying that they have a discretion to decide what is suspicious, and they can hold people on conspiracy charges, which has happened right now. There's still 10 people in prison who are being held without trial on conspiracy charges for organizing these protests. So from a personal point of view, I'm not really sure where I go from here, but I think it's so difficult with the climate crisis, especially in the UK, because despite having these kind of warning signs, you know, flooding, 40 degrees, it still hasn't really been brought home for people that there is an imminent threat, I believe. And you're acting on the science, but the science isn't enough to motivate most people. So the question is, how do we motivate people to stand up against this fossil fuel capitalism, which is going to cause vast areas of the earth to become uninhabitable in the next 10 to 20 years? I don't have the answer, unfortunately. I wish I did, but I think Just Stop Oil, yeah, it's we haven't managed to get the government to commit to no new fossil fuels, which has been obviously massively disappointing. But I think it's too early to say whether it's been a success or not. There has been like small victories. So and with these protests, it's always hard to say what has led to, you know, it's not quite linear. It's hard to say, unless the government was to say, okay, you know, you win, we're just going to stop new fossil fuels. It's hard to say what the reaction was, you know, the consequence, if you like. But it's a a relatively small group of people. They're in less than 2,000. They've become a household name. They've got mass media attention for the issue. There's been countless debates on TV, on national TV, about the issue, and they've debunked a lot of the myths about needing new fossil fuels, which, as we know, will not drive down the price. The price stays the same. The likes of Shell and BP will just sell at market rate, and it doesn't improve energy security. Labour have committed to no new fossil fuels. Scotland have said they'll do it. HSBC, that was another victory. They've said that they will not invest in any new fossil fuels. There are other banks that still need to sort themselves out. So I'd encourage anyone who banks with Barclays, NatWest to switch banks. It's a bit of a faff, but it is a really effective way to stop your money going to new fossil fuels, because most people don't even realize that their money is actually being used to fund it. Yeah, so that's about it, really.
Okay, thanks so much, Alfie.
I hope I was within time. But yeah, thank you all. Solidarity with everybody. Yeah, we just have to keep fighting.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Alfie, and for sharing so many of those personal stories. You know, when we're faced with such a climate challenge in the world, you know, and these world leaders get together ever so often, talk rubbish and make promises, and then we get Sunak jumping in a jet to travel from London to Leeds, and you know, there's no, you know, why should we accept anything that they say? And then when we take action, direct action to try and prevent them destroying this planet, they try to discourage and to imprison people, and we think it's just appalling. I remind you, we've got your cup. You're a champion for us. We back you completely in the work you've done, and we will continue to support that. CLS definitely, you know, is in favor of taking direct action to help save this planet. There's only one planet. Okay, thank you. I see some more people have joined us. I see Jackie there. Thank you for showing up, Jackie. And
hi, Luke, thanks.
Yes, and I know people are saving the questions for after the next speaker that we will get to. So yes, I'll take this moment now to introduce Diane McCaulay from Jamaica, and you're in sunny Jamaica here. So you're very welcome to CLS meeting. You've been a climate activist for all of your life, it seems like, for 30 years. You said you've been doing work. And I'll just read maybe one sentence because I think people have got this ad. Diana led a wide range of efforts to educate Jamaicans on the importance of the natural environment, organized campaigns to protect the island's special places, and participated in filing groundbreaking legal action to build environmental jurisprudence in Jamaica. Now, we had one meeting on the cockpit country before to try and draw attention to the way in which the bauxite company is looking to infringe on that region. It's an activity that we will continue fighting. So we're really pleased to invite you, Dan, to listen to you on what's happening in Jamaica. Please take the floor.
Thank you, Luke, and thanks for having me. Hello to everyone. Yes, I'm in sunny Kingston, Jamaica. I was really moved by the previous speakers, and just want to say that I'm personally so grateful to anyone who is prepared to put their bodies and their freedom, their liberty on the line for this issue. At one level, I don't quite understand why everyone is not prepared to, given the stakes, but because I've had this long experience of trying to organize such actions, taking part in them, I also know what the hurdles are. So thank you, Alfie and Nick and everyone who works with you both. to speak personally, I wouldn't describe myself as a climate activist, because my time doing this is long, since the late 1980s. And it certainly wasn't climate that brought me into it. It was just briefly being taken. I've lived all my life in Kingston. I was born here, and apart from 2 years in college in the US, I've lived here all my life. And I was taken by a public health professional to two places I, as a lifelong Kingstonian, had never been to. And one was the Riverton City dump, which is where all the garbage for Kingston and other parts of the island goes, a major dump. And it is a dump, it is not a landfill. And the Harbourview sewage treatment plant, which is on the shores of Kingston, not actually Kingston Harbour, but Big Sea, as we call it. And it hadn't worked at the time I first saw it, for 15 years. And untreated sewage was just flowing across the beach and into the sea. And I remember standing on that beach and thinking, in what universe is this okay? And I had the same epiphany, if you like, at Riverton. I had never given any thought to what happened to the bag of garbage I put at my gates. And this was where it ended up. And there was crowds and crowds and crowds of people, including very young children, sorting through the waste, which there was no system of management or public safety or anything like that. And I guess I was young enough and perhaps incautious enough to think somebody should do something, and no reason why it shouldn't be me. So that's how it started. And in 1991, the Jamaica Environment Trust was formed. So I didn't start as a climate activist. As the other two speakers have said, you do get sick of filling out petitions, and certainly my own background was trying a lot of other things. I'm what's described in Jamaica as uptown, which is a very kind of, I could be here for half an hour talking about what being uptown means, but it does mean I stand in a position where I on the side of the road protesting something, I would probably attract the media camera, and I would also probably be the last person to be arrested. And so it's a position of privilege. It's also a kind of a burden as well, and it also attracts a whole lot of criticism about hypocrisy and, not walking the talk and that kind of thing. So in the early years of being a variety of posts, president, volunteer president, eventually I left my private sector job and to work for JET full time. In those number of positions, I've tried many things. And the first thing I want to say about protest is that it comes in various forms, and maybe direct action is a better term for it, because if I were to point to one of the most successful things that I ever did, it was not covered by the media. There was no street action. All it involved was me showing up at a public meeting where I was the only member of the public. And it also involved being the only member of the public and the only person on the head table, apart from the environmental consultants, who had actually read the document that we were there to discuss. And it was about putting a hazardous waste incinerator in a residential area where I happened to live then, still live. And they went through their presentation, and I then stood up and said, but your report, page 135, recommends not a hazardous waste incinerator, but an autoclave. And to say it as we would say it here, meeting broke up, because they didn't realize that the document that they were here discussing to push forward this hazardous waste incinerator actually recommended something different. So for me, direct action is first of all about showing up. And it's also about doing a lot of really boring behind the scenes work, like reading these endless documents, using whatever public processes exist, and really trying to, I really support what Alfie said about getting things in the media, because one thing I learned as well is if you start out as an advocate or an activist, you write a lot of letters, you get invited to sit on committees, you try and get things to change. But until the thing is in the newspaper or on television, the government people pay no attention to it. It's at the bottom of their to-do list that's on their desk. And part of your job as an activist or an advocate is to get things where people know what's happening, even if, as it inevitably does, it attracts criticism. So I regard getting any discussion in the newspaper, getting any debate going as a success. And the other thing I learned, sort of responding to what Alfie said about things not working, is it's really quite impossible to say what caused what. And I think about a campaign that we ran to save a place called Goat Islands, which was going to be a huge logistics hub and a coal plant. And at the end of the day, the current administration decided not to go ahead with it. Now, can I say what actually caused that? Can I say it was the actions of Jet? Can I say we organized what we call a goatilla with a lot of fisher folk who took their boats out, and they took people who had never been to this place, had never heard of it before this hit the newspapers. Can I say it was a research study that was done by a different non-governmental organization? Can I say it was someone else who took the then newly elected Prime Minister Andrew Holness to see the place? It's impossible to disaggregate or to say this was my success. So all we can do is make common cause around the issues, and we will never know whether it was our input that brought anything about. And I think of it as being, water dripping on a stone, really, which does in fact wear away the stone. And I also think about when you decide to evaluate your success or otherwise. So about halfway in my journey, I gave up the idea of success or failure. I started to frame it for myself as what I could do, what was in my hands, what things I had not tried, what imagination I could bring to it. And then I let go the outcome. And I think for people who are on this, certainly admittedly very difficult journey, that is one piece of advice that I would give. We are all very small players in this overall massive hurdle that humanity faces. And it's very important to husband ourselves and not become overwhelmed by feelings of failure. We're up against some of the most powerful forces in the world. And it doesn't do us any good to spend a lot of time, being discouraged by that. I've heard about Just Stop Oil here. I've heard about Extinction Rebellion here. And that to me alone is a success. To talk a little bit about the situation here, I would say that there's a lot of climate apathy. Kingston is one of the first cities that should experience climate departure this year. So 2023, where our warm days, the number of warm days becomes the floor rather than the ceiling, and the temperatures now have our warmest days. The lowest temperature was what used to be the warmest. That's a bit incoherent, but I hope you guys know what I mean by that. But it feels, being here in the global south, that affecting this is out of our hands. These are giant forces that operate largely in Western countries, with some exceptions like China and India. And all we can really do here is decide how we're going to respond to the changes that are already happening. I would say our own government, it would be quite delighted to find oil. We do have current prospecting licenses that have been issued for prospecting on a place called the Pedro Bank, which is our last remaining and healthiest fishery, a big underwater bank off the south coast of Jamaica. We have bauxite mining, as you all know. I'll talk a little bit about a recent case that's very hopeful. So I think the general feeling here is that it's too big for the average person. My own family, who is exposed to me to the point of nausea, kind of goes, Diana, stop. We don't want, let's just have a drink. you know, the kind of thing they feel disempowered, they don't think there's anything they can do about it, and they don't want to face it. I find that is also true in government circles, that what our objectives remain is to have Western lifestyles, and by that I mean American lifestyles, or, you know, the bigger the house, the more cars, the more travel, all of this is all still greatly admired here. One of the things that going to Riverton did for me all those years ago was cement in my mind this idea of sacrifice. So how we, those of us who have Western lifestyles, and I count myself among that, they are built on a set of people who are sacrificed for that to happen. And the bauxite industry, I think, is a really good example of that here in Jamaica. Jamaica is a small island, and bauxite, you know, is mined in a place like Australia, which is large in strip mines that are far away from people. But here in Jamaica, bauxite mining and refining takes place in the middle of rural communities. And those people are regarded as worthy of sacrifice because of the quote unquote benefits of the industry, where the costs are never counted. And so it was me standing on that pile of waste, which I was part of. My waste went there. I realized the comforts that I had, and I'd had all my life, depended on a set of people being relegated to a sacrifice zone. And I think the climate movements has to make common cause with those people who are being sacrificed. And of course, people in the Niger Delta in Nigeria, there are people in South America now in the Amazon. There are many, many people like that who are just considered worthy of sacrifice. Because I felt frustrated about 10 years in, you know, again, the search for the success, that's what made me become interested in the law. It was not something that we tried, and I could give you a very, very long list of all the things that we tried. Education, public education, education in schools, sitting on any committee that would have me. I can't tell you how many documents reviewed, how many policies sent in, how many public meetings gone to, which is also a form of direct action that's difficult. You stand up in a public meeting where people have been organized to be there, having been promised jobs for whatever it is that you're there to discuss. And you are going to stand up and try and articulate concerns about the marine environment or, you know, some fern on a hillside. It's difficult to do. And all of this felt to me at the time as if it had been ineffective. And during my time in the US, I learned about some early environmental cases, came back to Jamaica, determined to file environmental cases. And Jet did that. Our first case was on a very large hotel that was to be built in an area that had been slated for protection, but never actually protected on the North Coast, called Pear Tree Bottom. And it was a bit of a Pyrrhic victory, because although the court did quash the permit by saying the the consultation process had been entirely ineffective, that the hotel did go ahead and being built. But it did send shockwaves through the system. And that is when I also became certain that part of my job was, yes, to keep these issues in the media, but also to build environmental jurisprudence, human rights jurisprudence, climate jurisprudence, so that our laws start to change. I can go on and go on forever, so I'll talk a little bit about the bauxite case recently, which some of you may know about. So that it was not filed by the Jamaica Environment Trust. I should say I retired at the end of 2017. I wanted to open the space for a new generation of young people to come up. I didn't want to be one of those people who is in the ring until they're punch drunk, you know. So I think you spend your time building the institution, building a movement, and then there does come a time when you must hand it over to others. So I did that. So this wasn't filed by Jet. It was filed by a young attorney called Melanie Elaine. Her organization is called Freedom Imaginaries. And she did two things. She went to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights to ask the commission to deliberate on whether bauxite mining in Jamaican communities presents a risk of irreparable harm to those communities. And recently, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights agreed and said that it did, and it required of the Jamaican government precautionary measures to prevent that. And the Jamaican government has asked for a period of extension, which has not yet expired. So that was groundbreaking, never been done before. And then she also filed a constitutional case on behalf of 9 residents in St. Anne who live in close proximity to where a mining lease has already been granted and will go ahead close to their communities. The case has not yet been heard. It's in November. But one of the things she's done, which is also amazing, is she asked for an injunction to stop the bauxite company from going ahead with mining in the interim. And that's something I never had the courage to do, because as in many countries, if you file an injunction, you have to give an undertaking for damages in case your legal action is unsuccessful. And that would have meant really putting JET's own financial longevity on the line, or my personal financial health on the line. And I never had the courage to do it. This young woman did. And she asked the court to waive the right for an undertaking for damages, and the court agreed. They granted the injunction. The bauxite company cannot go ahead with mining until the case is heard in November, and they agreed for the requirement for an undertaking for damages to be waived. This is, it didn't really make the press because it broke with the big financial crisis we've been having, but this is the most tremendous leap forward. And behind that, though, to go back to my statement about you don't know what caused what, this is based on a constitutional right that Jamaica has in its Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So in our new Charter of Rights and Freedoms, going back to, I think it's 2011, but don't hold me to the exact date, there is a right to a healthy and productive environment, free from just the threat of damage or abuse to the ecological heritage. And I remember being part of that discussion to try and get an environmental right into our constitution. Completely behind the scenes, boring meetings, going back and forth over the language. And eventually we got it. A most critical step, unheralded, unnoticed, that now this groundbreaking legal action is based on. So that was a really good thing. There's another bauxite related case where a different bauxite company dumped its waste into one of our major rivers, the Rio Cobre, destroyed the fishing livelihood of about 120 fishers, shut down the Spanish Town water treatment plant for about 3 weeks. People got no domestic water, stopped all the irrigation that came from that river into farming, into fish farming. And the government has started to use performance bonds for big industrial applications. The bond was pulled, and although the state agencies were compensated first, so the National Water Commission, the National Irrigation Commission, and the National Environment and Planning Agency, who had not enforced the law against this company since the 1980s, not in a sufficient way in any case. A small amount was given to the fishers, the largest amount they've ever been given for the compensation to their livelihoods, but they had to sign away their right to take further action against the state. So work is ongoing now to see if there's still a route for a constitutional claim on their behalf. The last thing I'll say is about threats and dangers of taking a public position, which I certainly felt in my time. And I know the young people here in Jamaica who have now taken this baton feel, and I listen to Alfie and know that these threats are real. And for me, this calls forth us so strongly for us to organize and make common cause with others, because, and also to keep things public. Things like that flourish in silence, and they flourish where we are divided. And so for me, one of the things that I find disappointing here in Jamaica is that the environmental movement has never really coalesced around coordinated type of action. I mean, of course, we all have, there's things we disagree on, but we should be able to come together about something. And if it is that one thing, it is the impact of what the climate crisis will do to a place like Jamaica, what the fossil fuel companies who are still making these obscene profits have done to the entire planet. And I accept these kinds of invitations because I so still want to be part of and join with other voices standing in vastly different places about what seems to me the most incredible threat that humanity has ever faced, that we are just, playing a violin as we head towards, if you don't mind the mixed metaphors. Lastly, I have another, I said lastly already, but I have another career as a writer. I've written novels, short stories, and so forth. And for me, I think one of the things we have to do better is tell better stories, capture people's imaginations, because people are not moved to act by the science. I think that's clear now. But we as human beings have always been moved by stories. And that's what we have to turn our minds to. How can we tell a better story than the story that is being told by governments all over the world and the fossil fuel companies all over the world? So I'll stop there. And thanks again for inviting me.
Great, thank you very much, Diana. That was really encouraging, and I think reminding us, why we come together, to show solidarity with each other, to gain strength from each other, that we struggle, not only in the streets, but in the courts and politically, of course. I'm reminded that we just had the Latin American conference in London, which is the biggest conference on Latin America in the world. I think it was packed out. I think we are at a period of high activism now in the UK with the action that the government is trying to suppress and oppress people. People are fighting back. The trade unions are definitely up for the fight, and many, many citizens are up for the fight. I think we've got no choice but to keep fighting. We won't be defeated. Out of the Latin American conference, one of the things that, was very encouraging is the way in which, they left in, it's no longer a pink tide they talk of, but a red tide. Things are beginning to change a lot in Latin America. For many of us who followed Latin America over the years, we know how the US has had the feet on their neck for a very long time. People have had enough of it. People are rebelling everywhere. Most countries are going towards the left, and they're doing some really good things, not only in the environment, but in terms of human rights in every direction. We had speakers from Nicaragua, from Cuba, from Venezuela, talking about the way in which they've managed to fight the sanctions, in which they've been encouraged to develop their own agriculture. They're now mostly food sovereign, and I think that is really important. Venezuela used to import something like 90% of their food, and now are producing, way over 50% or 70%, I think that the figure was. Nicaragua is outstanding on that as well. In Nicaragua, they've also not only about the environment and other things, but also about women's rights. In parliament now, our government, they've got to have 50% women. So we see all these progressive changes happening in these countries, and we are encouraged by it. And I think it's important we come together and share these stories, and that we write about them too. So thank you for your writings as well, Diana. We look out for that. I've got a couple of hands up. I won't put up a question now myself, but except to maybe just remind people about the way in which, big capital is out to determined to keep the South oppressed in many ways. I was really shocked to learn recently that in Jamaica, the IMF, one of the conditionalities in terms of the loan was that the government not be involved in promoting and getting involved with developing agriculture. We know in Cuba and Nicaragua, they are doing amazing things with food and development and how that's happening, and in Venezuela. And this is something the whole Caribbean needs to do. I think it's ridiculous that we've got, we import so much, we spend so much in importing food in the Caribbean. It's just outrageous. And now we've been prevented from even developing agriculture. And if we to listen to Alfie soon, you know, we will be starved, you know, won't be able to do anything about it. Okay, we've got a couple of hands up. So I'll take them in the order I've seen them. And we've got Paul first and then Marsha Hines. Paul Ward, Marsha Hines. Your
Okay.
questions to the panel. Thanks. Or comments.
Thanks, Luke. Well, first of all, it's been a great meeting so far, you know, so thanks to all the speakers. Just two things really. I wanted Diana to add a little bit about ELAW, that I know you're involved in it sometime, if you can, the Environmental Law Alliance Worldwide. And then I also was hoping that somebody could say something about the big oil in Guyana, because Melinda Janke was originally supposed to be part of this meeting, and unfortunately she couldn't make it. But perhaps somebody else could. I only know briefly a little bit about it, but maybe somebody else could add some details about that too. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. I'll take two questions and then, you know, put it to the panel. So Marsha, please come in.
Thank you very much. Greetings, everyone. I just wanted to say thanks to the panel for taking us through their very comprehensive reflections. I know that, you know, some would have said it, but I just feel like, you know, a part of the work that we could perhaps reflect on a bit more is how to support and care for the people who take on this work. I don't know if I'm imagining, but it feels like, especially Alfie, you know, my heart is sitting with you right now. I can feel the residual trauma that is there. And I just feel that, you know, so many of us, I guess I could say, give so much of our time and our well-being to these causes that we really need to start to think about funding and support, not just in terms of, you know, legal funds, which are important and that kind of thing, but also access to care. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Thank you. Okay, I'll come back to the speakers. Please, if any of you want to take up any issues, those questions.
So I could just say about ELAW, which thank you for that question, Paul. And I'd actually made some notes about what I wanted to talk about. And of course, they were one of them, and then I didn't get to it. So back in about 2000, JET was approached by the Environmental Law Alliance Worldwide. At this point, we'd not filed any legal action to see if we could work together. And the initial work that we did was to train lawyers, young lawyers who were at the Norman Manley Law School here in Kingston at the University of the West Indies in environmental law. And that was the first set of projects that we did. And two of those lawyers eventually worked at JET and became our legal officers. And so for about 9 years, we had joint funding from ELAW for the legal program JET had, which at its largest meant that we had 2 on-staff lawyers. They were a fantastic benefit for us. And on the question of support, yes, there was financial support so we could hire lawyers, but there was a whole range of other things as well. No small Southern NGO like JET is ever going to have every possible expert on its staff or even on its board. And the relationship with ELAW, which brought together lawyers and scientists all over the world, allowed me to ask anything I wanted of this group. So if I'm suddenly faced with, you know, I don't know, some very technical issue about waste to energy, there was somebody there who could help. Or a, 900-page EIA, there was someone there who could help review it. So they were a very important partner for us. And, sometimes there are risks for Southern NGOs working with Northern NGOs. They were extremely respectful, accepted our lead all the time, and really made a very big difference to how we were able at all to mount legal action against the state. I don't know if there's anyone else who can speak about the Guyana case. I have been, or speak more knowledgeably than I can. I'll just say that in the event that there's a big oil spill from the work that's the drilling and extraction that's going on in Guyana, that oil spill will sweep along the entire south coast of Jamaica. And it is extraordinary to me that this is not a topic of discussion here at all. I think Melissa's case is groundbreaking as well. I'm not sure when it's going to be heard. It hasn't been heard yet. And in the meantime, of course, Exxon and the Guyanese government is going full steam ahead with new oil extraction.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Diane. I don't know if any of the hands that are up want to address the issue of oil, but the little I know is I know that
I would like to.
Okay, Ozzy, I'll leave it then to you, Ozzy. So we got two other hands up, Ozzy first and then Joseph to
No, I
comment.
think I think Joseph wanted to deal with the big oil. So I will let Joseph make his intervention, and I just have a short question.
Okay, I'm just taking the hands in order which I see.
Yeah,
them.
good evening. Yeah, good evening and good morning still. I think it's still morning in the Caribbean. In terms of the oil, by the way, I represent an organization known as Friends of the Earth, who had a very successful panel discussion last week on crime and violence, managing that in the Caribbean, which Marsha was on. And on that panel, there was a professor from Trinidad, Professor Clyde Phillip, who tried to hijack the session to promote the oil in Trinidad, in Guyana on behalf of the president of Guyana. He wants thousands of people to be trained. And so there is a concerted effort to really push this, which we should push back against it. We cannot have oil as one of the avenues to solve the problem of employment and ending crime and so on. So I think there's a vicious attempt to really make that entrenched. I can't find the words right now, but it's vicious because there's this professor from Trinidad asking me to help him get 500 young people to be trained because Guyana needs support for the oil industry. Bearing in mind that the president of Guyana is complaining that he has to go to the Middle East to get 5,000 people to get in the oil industry. But there's another issue I want to raise, which might not be put in, but I think people need to know that. Simply talking, our concern a lot is about the state, and the young man described about the collapse of society. And so as of Friday, I think, if I'm not wrong, we have a new element in the Caribbean where the United States have begun to settle ex-people from, at least they settled one from Guantanamo in Belize. And that is creating an uproar in Belize at the moment. We are destabilizing our hemisphere, the Caribbean. So I hope that we could look at that in the future.
Okay, thanks for that and for informing us about the oil situation and what's happening in Guyana a bit. Ozzy, you're up next. Sorry,
Yeah,
did
just a
anybody
quick.
sorry, before you come in, Ozzy, I'm not sure if any of the speakers wanted to respond to anything Joseph said. No? Okay, Ozzy, come in.
Yeah, really fantastic presentations. I was very, very impressed by it. And for sure, Diana, I'm going to look at our bookshop to buy one of your novels. I love Caribbean writers, so I will take in one of that. Capital has this incredible way of adapting to its own crisis created by its own self. And my question to the panelists is, how do we address this issue of structural adjustment being wrapped up in this concept called just transition? I think that is really important because we may very well find ourselves in a situation where we have really is green capitalism, or even worse, green colonialism. So I would just like to, put that, to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Okay, you can all go. Panelists, anybody want to respond to anything, Ozzy?
So I guess it comes back for me to this question of telling better stories, A company like Exxon or Total, who operates here in Jamaica, they have a PR department that I can't even imagine what budget it has or what expertise it has at its disposal. And we, on the other hand, are either voluntary organizations, or we might have one or two people running a social media account. So there's this enormous imbalance between what stories get told. But I think if you can look for and find terms that resonate with the public, and one of them is a sacrifice zone. I have not found anybody who's going to stand up and defend that there has to be a sacrifice zone and some people have to be sacrificed in order for the rest of us to have these jobs. Right? I also think, and I myself have been guilty of this in the many years I've been doing this. I also think environmental groups have to link people and people's welfare to their messaging better than we currently do. You know, in the recent situation with the Rio Cobre, meeting with the people there was a group of people who said, yeah, like you know, Kingston person, you know, you only care about the river, you don't care about we. And I think sometimes the environmental movement has been guilty of that. Now, I care about the river too, but I'm also offended by and outraged by the way that the 120 people who are catching fish out of the Rio Cobre, it's their main source of protein. It's a small amount of income for them. For some of them, they've been doing it for 70 years and it's the only income they have. That we are prepared to sacrifice them. So it's to me about trying to use some of the techniques that have been used so well to frame this debate as being about jobs, as being about what we call development. We have to use some of those techniques in finding those terms that resonate with people than we have been. I'm sorry, I don't have a quicker answer than that.
Great, thanks, Dan. Anybody want to say anything? Nick, did you want to come in on that? Yes, you need to unmute.
Yeah, just to say, one of the moves that Extinction Rebellion would like to see is to change the whole democratic process and to look much more towards citizens' assemblies and to try to remove the seat of power from the top so that it starts at the bottom and that people are much more involved in the decisions that are made about what should be done. And that starts with the whole issue about the climate crisis and goes through all the other aspects of ordinary civilization that we need to work together to deal with. So it does require a pretty dramatic change in the way things are done, I think, to try to avoid what you're concerned about, Ozzy, in terms of, you know, it just becoming green capitalism. So it is about a real rethink, a radical rethink about the way in which we are governed or we govern ourselves. Pretty dramatic stuff, I know.
Yes, but I think it needs dramatic solutions. At this meeting I was just recently at, I think one of the speakers talked about what China was actually doing in terms of the environment, which is, you know, far more than those that attend the conferences and make bold statements. He talked about the use of electric cars, how it started to actually reduce the carbon footprint. And they have some of the fastest trains in the world. Maybe Sunak could have used one of those to get to Leeds the other day rather than flying by jet. And they've reduced their travel tremendously in China because of the network of super fast trains. And that's something they continue to build on. Of the thousands of super fast trains in the world, almost all of them are located in China. So there's a lot for these other developed countries, as it were, to learn how they will fight the environment and the progressive things they can do. I've got Steve question and then I've got Bibi. So Steve, you want to come in with your question?
Yeah, well, it's to carry on a little with what Ozzy was saying about the idea of a just transition and the way some governments have hijacked the term to turn it into a form of structural adjustment. And so I saw something that Ozzy wrote recently where he talked of a real just transition. I mean, the danger of adjective inflation here, I realize, but I think, you know, we have to make sure that we do, you know, that we don't let them steal a term that was ours originally. Just as one example of something we have been doing here, the Southeast the southeast region of the British TUC has set up a just transition and environment emergency committee in order to campaign within trade unions on this issue, because it's a question of trying to win workers in these industries to realize that their skills, and to fight for the fact that their skills can be better used productively. I mean, the classic example, I suppose, is something the RMT brought up recently about how the people who currently make offshore oil drilling have got the skills to make offshore wind farms much more productively, and things like that. We had and even on a small scale, I mean, we've been involved in the campaign against the Edmonton incinerator. That's in Edmonton's an area in North London where they've got one incinerator and they want to build a much bigger one. And we managed to, when I say we, the local people managed to organise a campaign of Black Lives Matter, 2 or 3 local trade union councils, Extinction Rebellion, the Turkish Communist Party, the local branch of the Turkish Communist Party even, and that sort of united front of local people, I think, and attempting to approach the people in the incinerator to say, something better could be done with your labour and something safer for you as workers as well, because all of these polluting industries are also even worse for the people who work in them. So I think that's the sort of at different levels, just a few ideas. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Steve. Baby.
Firstly, thank you for your contributions, Nick and Diana. It was really inspiring to hear both of you. I also wanted to say that I'm sort of a representative of Just Stop Oil in Alfie's absence, because he had to go back to work. So if there's any questions related to that, I'm happy to answer them. But I wanted to come in on Ozzy's point about green capitalism or green colonialism, because I think it's a very difficult subject, but we need to address it if we want, a livable future. Just look at the lithium mining that's happening in South America that is necessary to have this transition to a more green world. We want to avoid a situation where we're just extracting more from the countries in the global south to preserve, this sort of life of luxury and comfort that we have in the global north. And so I think if we rebuild this world or transform this world, which can, for example, be done by having these citizens' assemblies or people's assemblies, such as Nick mentioned, I think we also need to keep in mind that we will have to change the way we live. We have to be able to do with less consumerism, less flying, less meat. And I think it's not a popular term to say, but degrowth is something that's been brought up more. And I think it's important to bring to light, because I don't see a future or I don't see a world where I'm, I'm now 26. I don't see a world where I'm 60 and, everyone's just still flying the same and eating products of meat. And yeah, just this world where we have exponential growth and continued extraction from our resources, because the earth simply can't take it. So I just wanted to highlight that, but it's a very difficult topic, but it's something that we need to discuss and hopefully, have less of everything.
Thanks a lot. I'll give the panelists a chance to respond to anything there before I ask Paul to come in. No? Okay, I see no hands raised, so Paul.
Yeah, hi. Ozzy, you brought up the just transition. I wonder if both you and Diana could say a little more about what you found effective in terms of trying to persuade workers, potential actual beneficiaries of damaging industries, when you, I mean, you mentioned it, Diana, that you met such people at meetings. You have obviously had to respond, and obviously you, Ozzy, as well. I'd like to hear more about what you found persuasive to such people.
Yeah. Okay, before they get a chance to come in, I'll just jump in because I know within the Labour Party there's discussions about the position that the Labour Party will take in terms of arms production. Many in the past, unions have tried to defend their right to produce, and which has created a real problem. I think a big issue for many trade unionists and environmentalists, because we know that the military actually are the worst polluters in the world. The Americans are the biggest, they emit more CO2 than any other organization or any government. So we will, and it's not even counted. When they have these big conferences, they exclude any discussion on the production of arms and use of arms and so on. So, this is something that needs to be brought to the table. People say it's jobs created. We know the mighty industrial military complex provides much succor as it was to the capitalist system. And, we're looking at system changes really in terms of the way we go forward. And there needs to be more talk of socialism, not only, in the Caribbean, but in the whole world. Okay, I'll just stop there. Joseph, I see you've got your hand up. Is that an old hand?
I was, I was just going to talk about what you just mentioned there, moderator. The fact that we don't factor in the military, and the military has to be one of the institutions that come under scrutiny more and more, because the amount of fossil fuel that they use, and also other resources that we could be spent on and building societies, building hospitals and so on. I mean, we have to just see what happened a few years ago in Afghanistan, where $2 trillion was spent to bring some kind of order there, and they have more disorder there than anything else. I mean, I don't know if people know, I was told that to transport one gallon of oil, of fuel, to execute the one in Afghanistan cost the US military $400. I mean, when they calculate it, is that the kind of world we want to continue to live in, or we need to really find a way to scrap? To do away with the military first of all, and generally to undo capitalism too, because the military is very much tied up with capitalism. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, any comments?
So on Paul's question about relating to people who are directly people who work in the bauxite industry and also live in close proximity, and so they have occupational health issues. It's a tremendously complex situation in Jamaica, because it's not just the worker who works in the plant and is earning a living and has probably a better standard of living than many of his or her friends and family, but it's also the dependence on those friends and family on the income that the worker has. And also there's this aspect of fear as well, that if you start to stand up against a major employer in the area, there are going to be impacts not just for you, but for your family. And I mean, one of the criticisms that I got over many years was, I didn't live in these communities. I was there speaking out on an abstraction rather than facing the problems that they had. And there was no other work, and people needed work. And I remember the last public meeting that I went to, which was out in Old Harbour over natural gas pipeline. And I decided I was just exhausted and I wasn't going to say anything. And I sat in the back of the room and got up to leave early. And a fisherman followed me out to my car, somebody I didn't know. And he said to me, Ms. McCaulay, why you never speak for us? So a lot of people in these communities, they're worried about all the things that all of us would be worried about, their children's health, their own health, but they don't feel often that they can be the ones to articulate these problems. And so they really won't to work with somebody who they feel is a bit insulated from what they will directly have to deal with. And they're not wrong about that. They will directly have to deal with aggression from these companies. I want to say something about what Bibi said, though, about us having to live with less. And I think the task in front of us is to come up with a way to frame what we're saying, that we're going to get more. It's not that we're going to have to live with less. It's that we are going to be better. We're going to have more family time. We're going to have better air quality, better water quality, more decent work, more green spaces, more contact with nature. We'll be better nourished. We will have less lifestyle related diseases. It's trying to come up with a narrative that doesn't say to people, all I'm demanding of you is sacrifice. And that, I think, is a task that's ahead of us.
Okay, thank you. Frank, I saw your hand was up just now. Have you changed your mind, or was your question answered? It's there.
No, actually, it wasn't. It was a clap. I was clapping what Joseph had just said. Okay.
Okay, that's great. That's good. Okay, I think I just read in the chat. I see our dear friend Christine Shepherd is